It started with a thought. I want to hear an astronomy and astrophotography podcast every week that is a deep dive into the kinds of topics that I want to hear about. That turned into a search. Soon after, nothing was returned. Really, there were just 5-minute what's in the night sky this week type shows, or shows that had made a few episodes but failed to take off. A few of them even called themselves the Astrocast, but they were no longer active. That thought then turned into a dream. What if I could build it? What's stopping me? I used to produce music. I have an Adobe license and everything I need to record software-wise. I have a nice microphone. Then I looked at the statistics. 90% of podcasts don't make it past 3 episodes. If you have more than 30 listeners a week, you're in the top 50% of all podcasts. So many trends, so many possibilities, so many ways to fail. I didn't care. I saw a niche and I knew the community. I know how passionate we are about what we do. I knew there was a gaping chasm that needed to be filled for those of us who love podcasts and astronomy and astrophotography. So I'm chasing the dream, regardless of what any numbers say or what any statistics foretell. All that being said, we're crushing them all, thanks to you guys. The Astrocast has surpassed my wildest expectations within its first 2 months of life, and we already have a small but dedicated group of listeners who tune in every week and continue to do so. And for this, I am beyond thankful. I will continue to steer this proverbial ship through the stars week after week, and we will continue to grow this family one episode at a time. Welcome to the 10th episode anniversary of the Astrocast.
Start. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All 3 engines have been burning.
Are listening to
2, 1.
the Astrocast. Welcome back to the Astrocast. I'm your host, Rue. Thank you for joining us this week. It is indeed our 10th episode. Spectacular, as I've been teasing all week long. I don't know if you saw the video. I thought it was pretty fantastic myself. You definitely don't want to disappoint the bird. That was basically the meaning of the video. If you did see that bird, that is our parrot. He is a 23-year-old African gray. His name is Zachary Bird, and he is quite hilarious. We ended up adopting him a little over a year ago now, after his previous owner unfortunately passed away. African grays actually live 60 to 80 years, so they oftentimes will outlive their owners and sometimes their second owners. So they really are an animal that you have to will out to another owner. So he was able to make a guest appearance in our promo video for our 10th episode. If you didn't get a chance to see that, it's pretty great. I will drop a link for it in the show notes, so you guys can have a look at it. So thank you for joining us this week. I'm quite excited about this week's episode because it marks our 10th episode, which is kind of a big deal. I know most podcasts tend to not really make a big deal about anything until they get to 100 episodes. However, 10 episodes is a pretty big deal for most podcasts because, as I stated earlier in the intro, the vast majority of podcasts actually don't make it past 3 episodes, and we're doing pretty well. We've got quite a few listeners already. We're very close to closing in on the 1,000 listeners mark, which I am quite excited about. That'll mean a lot of things for us once we cross that threshold. So I'm super excited about that. But all that being said, thanks for tuning in this week. The skies in Charlotte, North Carolina are finally starting to clear up a bit. We had new moon just a few nights ago. Unfortunately, it was cloudy for new moon, but we're still right around new moon, and it looks like it's going to be beautifully clear tonight. I will be heading down to the observatory tonight, hopefully with my buddy Chris, and we are going to try to photograph Pons Brooks, the devil comet, as it is known. It is about 30 degrees on the horizon right now, just after sunset, and it's pretty beautiful. I've seen a lot of shots of it from various people on the various Facebook groups that I follow. And I've been debating which lens I want to use quite a bit because I've got a bunch of different lenses. I'm just going to bring a star tracker with me. I thought about bringing all my gear, like the telescope and all that. But the fact of the matter is this particular comet is only going to be visible for really a few minutes in the night sky before it gets too low to photograph. So I'll really be lucky if I get 20 minutes of shots. So I'm just going to bring my Skyguider Pro, my tripod, and then my Canon R7. So I'm going to go down there before sunset. I'm going to get polar aligned as quickly as I possibly can. And then I'm either going to use my 50 millimeter lens. So I got a Canon Nifty 50, which is a f1.8 50 millimeter lens, which is a pretty cool, inexpensive lens if you don't have one. 50 millimeter lens is just an excellent all around prime lens. Everyone who owns a camera should own a 50 millimeter. Most folks will tell you that that's the first prime lens that you should buy if you're a photographer. And I would tend to agree with that because they're generally inexpensive. Don't get me wrong. They do make very expensive 50 millimeter lenses as well, but you can usually find an inexpensive one. And it's a pretty wide aperture at f1.8, so you can let in a lot of light very quickly. So I'm thinking I'm going to do like somewhere between 10 and 30 second exposures. It's going to kind of depend on what the light pollution looks like. The observatory is down in South Carolina and we're Bortle 4 down there. However, we're going to be looking north to find Pons Brooks because it's in the northwest where we are in the northern hemisphere. So, unfortunately for us, that's kind of towards the Charlotte Light Dome. So we're going to be kind of contending with that. And I do not have any screw-on light pollution filters that would fit on that particular lens. I also considered using my 135 millimeter lens. That's my Rokinon 135. But I was a little bit worried about being able to frame it up good, Pons Brooks that is, and being able to locate it quickly. With the 50, it's wide enough where I'm quite certain I can find it because Andromeda's in the area, and I believe Merak, the star, is right there too. So basically just find the constellation Cassiopeia, and then a few degrees left of it, you'll see Pons Brooks. So it should be pretty easy to find with the 50 millimeter, but you get the 135 and it's a lot more zoomed in and it could get a little bit tricky at that point. And being that I've only got a few minutes of time to image it once the sun goes down, I'm not trying to mess around and end up missing it because this is likely going to be my only shot to get a photo of this comet. Unfortunately, from my front yard, I'm not able to see it because the trees block my view of that portion of the sky. And I haven't really found a good spot, just within a quick driving distance of my house where I can get it. So the observatory really is my best bet. It's about an hour's drive from here. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing. Now, that said, it looks like we're going to have 3 or 4 clear nights in a row this week, which I'm super excited about because if you've been listening to the podcast, you will probably know that it's been 3 or 4 weeks since we've had any good night skies here in Charlotte, other than pretty much 1 or 2 nights that we had. And only one night I was able to actually image. So I am extremely excited about the possibility of having, 3 or 4 clear nights in a row right around new moon. To image. That is going to be super exciting. I'm also 90 days away now. I think it's 91 to be precise, but just above 3 months away from my dark sky trip out to Bortle 1 skies with my best friend in the world, Chris. We are going to be heading out to our Bortle 1 dark sky trip So I've got that on the calendar as well. Very much looking forward to that. It's funny, last year when we went, we did it on an extremely low budget, and the way we could make it work was we just had to get a 1-bedroom hotel because that was what we could afford. So, we had a queen bed, and we just made it work. We're both straight married men, just to be clear. But it is what it is. We had to share the bed. So we kid that we're going to be living like millionaires this time because we have 2 beds in the hotel room this time. So very excited about that, having 2 separate beds. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into our topics today. I wanted to give a shout out. I got an email from one of our listeners by the name of Roger out in Texas. Roger has been into astrophotography for about 2 years now. He lives just outside of Austin, Texas in Bortle Five Skies, and he is lucky enough to own an RV. So what he does is he actually occasionally gets to travel out to very dark skies, and he will bring his Star Watcher GTI or Sky Adventure GTI, and he's got a Red Cat 51, and he will go out with his Sony mirrorless camera. And he hopes to move to a dedicated astronomy camera in the near future, which is something that is a wonderful upgrade. If anyone like me started with just a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, and you're considering upgrading to an astronomy camera, there are a whole host of benefits for doing that. So first of all, I would like to mention that ZWO is releasing, actually they just released a new, very budget-friendly, dedicated, cooled astronomy camera, and that is the ASI 585 MC Pro, and that is going for just $599 US. That is incredibly inexpensive by astronomy camera standards, especially for a cooled camera. All the early reviews on it look very good. It is a smaller sensor. I believe it's a Micro Four Thirds. Let me check real quick. Okay, sorry. So that's a 1 by 1.2 inch sensor, and it's actually based on Sony's new 4K sensor, and that is, I believe, 8.2 megapixels. So it gives you an effective resolution of 3840 by 2160, which is a rectangular sensor size, which I very much prefer over a square sensor. I know I believe it's the 533 has a square sensor. I personally am not a fan of square sensors. I very much prefer the rectangular sensors. And I personally am considering purchasing this camera in the very near future before I go on my dark sky trip. I believe I talked a little bit about that last week. And Roger, if you're thinking about getting a dedicated, astrophotography camera, this might be one worth looking at. I think it would pair well with your Red Cat. Like I say, the early reviews look great, and there is no amp glow because of how the sensor is built. So you don't have to worry about amp glow, which, if you do not know, amp glow is light that can leak in to your frames as the sensor warms up. It's very typical on a lot of astronomy cameras. It's super easy to remove if you use dark frames, which are calibration frames whenever you combine all of your pictures together. But it can be a little bit of a pain, and a lot of people don't like dealing with amp glow. If you were to ask me, would you rather have amp glow or not have amp glow? Of course, everybody would rather not have amp glow. So, it's just one less thing to worry about. And it's, just a great modern camera with a very good well capacity. Overall, it just looks like a great camera. And for the price, man, you really can't beat it at $599. So highly recommend, Roger, look into that one if you're considering getting a new camera. So what Roger had asked about in his email, though, he asked about a few different things, but what I wanted to touch on today was printing. So I know I had mentioned way back, I think in episode 2, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been even the first episode, I had talked about printing images. And you know what? I just remembered, it was actually during the seasons of astronomy. I talked about printing images because I was saying that during galaxy season, there aren't a lot of great wide field nebulae for me to image. So that is a good time for me to go back over my old data and, reprocess it and then make some prints and do those sorts of things. So for printing your astronomy prints, there are a lot of different directions that you can go. I struggled with this a good deal before I ended up on the route that I am currently taking for my prints. I actually have a little bit of a small business going for my prints, and I'm going to explain to you exactly how I go about doing that. But before we get into that, I want to talk about what I am not doing and explain if it may or may not be the right thing for you to do. So what it really comes down to is you have to ask yourself, how much do you think you're going to be printing? Because what you will find very quickly when doing things like astrophotography prints is the economy of scale comes into play very fast whenever you're dealing with print services. So when I say print services, I'm referring to websites like MPix and any other number of websites that offer to have you upload your picture to their website, and then they will print it for you on either, high quality photo paper, a metal print, a canvas, whatever you prefer, and then they will mail it to you. So if you are just wanting to get a print made for yourself or a friend or a family member or a loved one, and that's all you're wanting to do, then this might be the correct route for you to take. So you could go onto a website like that and spend, depending on the size that you want, et cetera, maybe less than $100 and get a really nice, metal print made. For example, I went on mpix.com last year, and I had a really nice metal print made of the Flaming Star Nebula. And I believe I got it made for about $60. It's not a huge print, but it's a decent sized metal print. And I like it a lot. But what I could not do was have that made on that website and then turn around and sell that to someone else at a marked up price, because I think most people would probably laugh at me if I tried to make, any sort of real profit off of those photos after already paying the full retail price to the company that's making it. So that's kind of the sticking point that I want to make here. If you're just making these prints for yourself, or, it's like a one-off kind of situation for a family member or loved one, then using those websites or print services can be an excellent option. But if you get into a situation where you're considering selling your work and you're going to be making, let's just say, more than 5 prints, that's where you want to start considering purchasing your own printer. And I do not mean just a standard inkjet printer like you would use at home to, print your regular documents. That is not what you want to use to print photography images, particularly astrophotography images, because astrophotography demands, very high quality blacks, for example, because if the black quality isn't good, your night sky isn't going to look good. And if your night sky doesn't look good, then your image isn't going to look good. So you'll notice this if you go to somewhere like CVS and have a large, like, let's just say an 8x10 print made of an astrophotography image. If I were to make that same print at home on my Canon printer, using, very high quality glossy print paper, it's going to look so much better on my Canon photo printer than it would from a place like Walgreens or Walmart or CVS or whoever made it for me. And it's actually going to cost less for me to print it at home in the long run than it would be for me to have it printed at one of those shops. And we're going to get into the specifics of how much those costs are as well. So one thing I would like to preface all of this by saying is that I am a Canon guy. I use Canon photography equipment. I've always used Canon cameras. And whenever it was time for me to purchase my first large format printer, Canon was just naturally what I went to. So when I recommend an entry level large format printer today for you guys, it will be a Canon printer. That is not to say that there are not other excellent large format photo printers on their market. There are. Epson makes a really good large format photo printer. However, I have not used it before. All I can speak to is what I have used, and that is what I am going to personally recommend to you guys, because the printer that I purchased is very affordable by large format printer standards today, especially for an entry level printer, which is what I would recommend that you start with, and I'll explain why. And it can give you just excellent results. I have been blown away with the quality of photos that I have been able to print with this printer since I got it about 6 months ago. So with no further ado, the printer that I am referring to is known as the Canon Pixma Pro 200. Obviously, I will drop a link in the show notes directly to this printer. When I purchased it, it was actually going for $700 US, but right now it is actually on sale through most of the major retailers for just $500 US. And that, my friends, is an absolute steal for this printer. So it can print up to 13 by 19 inch prints, which is known as A3 plus. Essentially, that is like a small poster. If you've ever been into like a music shop and seen the small music posters that are often used for like music tour posters, that would be the same size as an A3 plus print. And if you take an A3 plus print and then you put it on a matted photo frame, it is a very large, beautiful centerpiece type photo. And with the frames that I typically use, once you have it in that matted frame, it's closer to 17 by 23 inches, which is actually, pretty large. And I'll actually also post a link to a picture of me holding one of my photos, so you can get a good idea of what kind of size I'm talking about. And just for our European listeners or anyone who's not in America, where we use the stupid imperial system, A3 plus is 33 by 48 centimeters. And, that matted frame, what I was referring to, comes to about 43 by 58 centimeters. So again, a very large size print. There are printers available, obviously, that can do larger size prints, but you will notice very quickly when you get past A3 plus, the price shoots up quite significantly. The cheapest one I was able to find that could get the next step up, which would be like 17 by 22, is close to $1,300. So, more than double the price, almost triple the price. And honestly, not that big of a difference in size. And what I've found is with that A3 plus size, I'm able to make, a good size print, and I'm able to turn around and sell those photos for, a decent amount of profit, while still able, to keep the prices low enough to where my friends and family are able to afford them, which is ultimately what my goal is, because, I'm not trying to make a killing off of my photos. I just want to be able to recoup my costs for the printer, recoup the cost for the ink, the paper, and obviously my equipment and time that I put into it, and then make a few extra bucks at the end of the day. So that's kind of what my goal is when I got into it. And I believe I have priced my prints accordingly to do that. Now, your situation is going to vary. Obviously, how much you charge for your work is entirely up to you. I will say, I feel like a lot of people go into it thinking that they should charge a lot less than what they're worth. I would highly recommend that you do not do that. Sit down and calculate exactly how much it's going to cost you to make each print. And one great thing about the Canon printers is they come with an excellent piece of software known as the Canon Accounting Manager. And what it will do for you is it can actually tell you exactly how much each one of your prints is costing you. So it can even get as granular as seeing, how much ink from each type of cartridge you are using. Like, for example, with astrophotography, I tend to use more blacks and grays than I do, yellows and greens on any given print. So it can factor that in to the overall cost of each print and let me know how much it's going to cost in the long run for every single print that I make. So definitely download that software once you get it all set up so you can see how much you're having to spend. Now, one of the big differences that you will find with true photo printers versus something like a cheaper office style inkjet printer is that they tend to have more colors in their ink tanks. So for example, my Pixma Pro actually has 12 separate ink cartridges to cover all the various colors. And what this is able to do is, mix the colors and give you much better color accuracy when you're printing. And there's a big advantage to this because what it means for you ultimately is that when a specific color runs out, you just replace that one color instead of having to replace everything on a more regular basis. And they do sell complete refills for these printers, and you can purchase that for about $137. But all I've had to do thus far is just replace the black and gray refill tanks so far, and those go for about $20 each. A lot of times you can actually find a combo pack for, I think I paid $23 on bnhphoto.com, and it had a black and a gray for $23, and I was able to replace those, and all of the other colors are still well over 50%. So that's going quite well. The software that comes with it is very good. It's super easy to use. It gives you the option for standard or high quality prints. When you do high quality prints, I do notice that the size of the file shoots up pretty dramatically. Like, for example, whenever I'm finished editing a photo through PixInsight and then, doing a few final touch-ups in Lightroom or Photoshop, sometimes I'll end up with like a 20 megabyte file, for example, like a DNG file. It'll go to like 350 megabytes whenever I send it over to the printer with the high quality print checked. And I'm not sure if that's because it's, blowing it up to the larger size or what that is. But in any case, I always use, high quality print whenever I am using the Canon printing software. And the results really do speak for themselves because they come out just absolutely beautiful. So the reason that I would choose something like a Pixma Pro 200 over something like the Canon Image Prograph 1000, which goes for about $1,300 versus the $500, on sale right now for the Pixma Pro 200, is that if you are looking to sell your work, I feel like A3 Plus is a great size to start with because, you don't always have to print A3 Plus. You could also do, 8x10 photos. You could do 5x7s if you want to do some smaller prints. I made some really cool 5x7 Milky Way photos, and you could, sell those for a lot less than you would for, a very large framed A3 Plus photo. And then you can kind of test the water that way. So before you go out and spend over $1,000 on a printer, why not start with something that's a little bit more affordable? And then if you find that you are quite successful with selling your work, then you can take the profits from that and then roll it into purchasing a new printer. Or better yet, like I'm doing, use those profits to purchase better astrophotography gear so you can make better prints down the line, which is what I just love to do. And I mentioned Ryder last week, a good friend of mine who lives down in Nil, Australia. And that's exactly what he does too. So he's actually in a gallery in Nil, And whenever he makes sales, he tends to use the money towards new astrophotography gear. And it's an excellent way to support our hobby with a little bit of a side income. So something really cool to do. As far as the photo paper is concerned, there's a lot of different ways that you can go. For starters, for me, I started with the Canon Photo Paper Plus Glossy 2. I know that's a bit of a mouthful. And they sell this in packs of 20. And I believe that goes for about $37 for a pack of 20. And that's the A3 plus size. So that's the really large ones. And it comes packed in a very hard cardboard sleeve, if you will. And I bought it from Amazon, so that came in its own box, and it was packed very well. So that's obviously important because you can't have photo paper bend or it'll essentially just be ruined. So the packing was very well done on this. And at $37 for 20 sheets, that works out to about $1.85 per sheet. Which isn't bad. Obviously you have to factor in your ink, and obviously you have to factor in the printer, and there's a lot of cost that goes into this, but just for the paper itself, that works out to $1.85 per sheet. Now, that being said, the next paper that I'm going to buy is going to be something that Ryder actually uses, and it is a higher quality, actually Galerie quality, and it's acid-free paper. And it's actually, like I say, it's what galleries use for photo prints oftentimes. And the brand is called Ilford Galerie. And I will also put this in the show notes. And I really like their metallic gloss paper. For things like astrophotography and Milky Way shots, metallic glossy photo paper really makes that image pop and almost gives it a 3D effect. I've actually purchased some prints from Ryder, and they really do pop. They have just a beautiful look to them, and it is significantly more expensive, but the results really are a lot better. So that is when I run out of my Canon photo paper, I am going to be switching to Ilford Galerie. So they sell this in 50 sheets, and that goes for $194. So I know that's a lot more, but when you work that out, it comes out to $3.88 per sheet. So it's actually not that crazy if you work it out like that. You know, $1.85 per sheet for the Canon photo paper, $3.88 per sheet for the Ilford Galerie paper. And like you say, that is indeed the stuff that they use in galleries. And if you ever get into a gallery, some of them actually have requirements that you have acid-free paper. So, you know, if you're thinking of trying to get into galleries, then that is something that you very well may have to consider. And if that's the case, then Ilford Galerie might be what you want to go with right off the bat. Now, as far as frames are concerned, this is a big point of contention because having a framed piece of artwork is so much different than just having a print. If you have it framed up nicely and matted and signed and dated, your work is going to be so much more professional, and it's going to be taken much more seriously than if you just try to put up a print and say, hey, I'm selling prints of my work, you know, give me $50 for my print. Don't get me wrong, plenty of people successfully sell just prints on their own, but me personally, I like to frame up my work. I like to sign and date each piece, and I actually also include a second small framed piece that explains what the object is that is in the photograph. So for example, with the Pleiades, I include a small framed 5x7 that explains the Pleiades and gives its, other name, the Seven Sisters, and explains about the nebulosity, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a cool little thing that, the customer can have to hang underneath the piece. So whenever someone is visiting and looks at it, they can read and see exactly what they're looking at, because most people will not know what they're looking at when they see an astrophotography image on the wall. They'll have no clue what it is. So if you include something like that, that can be, a huge bonus. What other people will do oftentimes is they will actually, finalize the photo and then maybe add text to the photo itself. I don't personally like to do this because I feel that it detracts from the overall photo. I like the photo to just speak for itself and then have a separate print that kind of explains what the photo is. Now, that being said, I don't do this for all of my prints, but whenever I can get these small frames, I do like to include them with pieces whenever possible. A little tip for you on frames, you definitely want to look around and you want to buy them up when the time is right. And what I mean by that is oftentimes art supply stores. So I'm talking about stores like Michael's, for instance. And if you're not in America, whatever your, local art supply store is, they will oftentimes have sales where you can buy one, get two free. So for the A3 Plus matted frames that I like to use for my work, I will not purchase them unless they are buy one, get two free, because if I purchase them at the regular price, it becomes very economically unfeasible for me to make any sort of profit if I'm having to pay, $50 for each frame and then, factoring in the cost of the print and the printer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you keep your eyes peeled and you buy those frames when they're buy one, get two free, then that cost comes down significantly. So what I will generally do is wait until one of those sales occurs, and then I'll go to my local, art supply store and I'll buy up as many as I can at a time. Now, one thing that I want to warn you of is, exploring with different types of frames. And I say this because I actually purchased a few of the floating frames because they had ran out of the matted frames that I like to use. And I saw these floating frames, which is basically, a large frame that you put a picture into and then everything is clear around the edges. I personally don't really care for the way that it looks. And I've got a few of them now because that's all that they had. And I kind of regret buying them. I don't know. Personally, my wife says she thinks that they look good. And I guess it really just comes down to personal taste. It's not that it's poorly constructed or anything like that. As far as the build quality, it's every bit as good as the matted frames. But it's just an aesthetics thing. I really prefer a matted frame to something like a floating frame, but that's really personal preference. So just pay attention to things like that and really think about it. Looking back, I probably would have just purchased one of those. But again, it's a buy one, get two free sale. So that's kind of why I did what I did. And then also consider things like different sized frames. So maybe you want to do some 8x10 prints and you can consider getting a larger than 8x10 frame so you can mat that out. If you don't know what a mat is, because I know I've used that phrase quite a bit, a mat is actually essentially, let's just say it's a piece of cardboard that is generally like a white or off-white or eggshell. It can even be black, really it can be any color that goes around your photo. And then, you have the frame around that. It's a very common thing in framing photos. If you were to go to, any art gallery, you would see, matted photos. If you go to a family member's house and they got a lot of photos on the wall, chances are many of them will be matted. And the difference is if you have a non-matted framed photo, then your picture is going to go from edge to edge of the frame. Whereas a matted photo is centered, in the middle of the mat. And then you kind of have a really thick border that goes around the image, and then you have the frame. So it makes it more of a focal point and kind of draws the eye to the center of the image and just kind of makes the image pop a bit more. In my experience, it really helps with astrophotography images. I love having a white mat with a black night sky. Well, I say black, but it's not truly black. It's more grayish. I mean, how the the night sky is. If you're making it totally black, then you're not doing it right, or you're clipping. But it really does improve the overall quality and look of the image. So I really, really like adding a matte to all of my photos. And then another thing that you can do is just make sure that you sign and date all of your pieces. This is an important part, because if you are, getting big into astrophotography and it's something that you do plan on pursuing for a long amount of time, hey, who's to say that you're not going to be, a famous astrophotographer one day, and that your work might not be incredibly valuable someday down the line. So signing and dating your work is a way for your early purchasers to say, hey, I've got, a signed and dated piece by the artist. Another thing that you can do is introduce scarcity with your pieces. So for example, let's say that you take a really, really pretty shot of Andromeda and you want to make, let's say, 3 prints of it. Well, let's go ahead and make those 3 prints, and then you're going to sign and date each of them. And then you want to number them as well on the back of the print. So, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3. And when you go to sell these prints, make sure that you announce it as such. 3 of 3, only 3 of these prints ever will be made. And the important part is that you stick to that. So it's not to say that you can never sell a picture of Andromeda again. Of course you can sell another picture of Andromeda, but for that particular print, for that processing job that you did, make sure that you just stick to those 3 prints and keep it that way. So that way that photo is unique and your buyer is getting something that is scarce, because scarcity increases value in the eye of the consumer. And this is an easy way for us to add value to our work. So I purchased my Canon printer, I believe it was last November. So I've had it for about 4 months now. And I've sold over a dozen framed prints already, all of them signed and dated. I'm not going to get into the specifics for what I sell my prints for, just because I don't really feel like that's an appropriate thing to cover on the show. And I don't want to influence you in any way as to what you should or shouldn't be selling your work for. That is a very personal decision for you to make. I will say, do not underprice yourself. Remember how much work goes into making these photos. I know that the consumer might not necessarily know that you're going out after midnight and staying up till 6 a.m. in 28-degree weather with your $6,000 astrophotography rig in the freezing cold and, taking these images all night long and then spending, 5-6 hours in PixInsight editing it and then printing that image on your, $600 printer using the $200 paper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But all that is to say, once you, frame, sign, and print that photo, don't turn around and sell it for $50 because you're selling yourself short if you do that. That's not to say you need to turn around and sell it for $1,000. You're likely not going to get too many buyers. You want to leave it somewhere where people can actually afford to purchase it. Your first buyers are likely going to be family and friends. Obviously, mine were. The first purchase that was made for me was my father-in-law. He came up here and, he immediately wanted to purchase one. And I actually had a wide field shot of the Orion Nebula and the Horsehead and Flame Nebula, and he loved it. And he actually paid me more than what I wanted for it, which was incredibly nice of him. And since then, countless friends and family members have purchased work from me. And to me, the most humbling and awesome experience that I've had in this hobby is when someone sends me a message showing my artwork hanging in their house. Like, that is the coolest feeling in the world to me, to know that somebody likes my picture enough to actually give it, a nice spot in their house to hang. So a good friend of mine recently purchased 2 of my prints for his sons, and he just last night sent me a photo of them hanging in his house. And man, it just made my day. So, if it's something that you're considering getting into printing, it's a big jump. Don't get me wrong. And I will say, if you're super early into the hobby of astrophotography and you're maybe not quite there yet with your processing, I would recommend that you work on your processing a good bit before you dive in to something like printing, because any small imperfections that you see on your monitor are going to be just blown up tenfold whenever you print them out on a large format printer, and people get really up close and look at them. Particularly like if you're clipping any colors, or you've got dust motes that show up because your flats weren't, great, or any number of things, imperfections will stand out on prints. So you really want to make sure that you're nailing your processing before you go and start printing your photos out. But that being said, if you do feel that you are there, you've gotten through PixInsight enough to where you're pretty comfortable with your workflow, and overall you're happy with the quality of your photos, then that is something that you should certainly consider doing. I will say, just a personal preference of mine, when I do my prints, I tend to saturate the photos a little bit more than I would for something like a upload to Facebook or Instagram, for example. Prints are something that you really want to catch the eye with. And I feel that using the most natural color scheme sometimes can not be as visually appealing as adding a bit more saturation to the photo, particularly with like emission nebula, reflection nebula, like the Pleiades, for example, really making those blues pop with like an electric blue kind of color. And, there's just various techniques that you can use. And the beauty of it is once you actually own a printer, you can play around a little bit with it. So like, for example, I saw somebody post in one of the groups that I'm in not too long ago. He went on one of the online websites that offers to do metal prints for you. And I can't remember the nebula that he had gotten a print of, but he was really disappointed because what they sent him was significantly darker than, what he had seen on his monitor. So he was expecting something to be, significantly brighter than what was actually sent to him. And unfortunately, when you use these services, there's not a whole lot that you can do about that, because you upload the image and, they give you a quote unquote preview, but you don't really know what you're getting until it arrives in the mail. And generally speaking, you aren't going to get any refunds unless there's something like, actually wrong with it, as far as like, they messed up the print and it didn't print out properly. But like, if the colors are darker than what you were expecting, for example, they're not going to refund you for that. They're going to say, yeah, sorry, you should have made it brighter. And there's not much that you can do about that. But if you have your own printer at home and you do a 8x10 photo and it comes out a little bit too dark, then you just put your photo in Lightroom and turn up that exposure a little bit and then print it out again and see how it looks. And, if it comes out better, then Bob's your uncle and you're good to go. So it really does give you a lot more flexibility in terms of how you can handle your editing and how you can handle, just overall the image handoff process. You don't got to worry about other companies handling your images. You are in complete control. And just like I said at the very beginning of this topic, whenever you use these online companies, if you're doing it for a one-off situation, if you just want one large metal print to hang over your desk, I completely get that. That's cool. That makes sense. I get it. But if you're looking to sell your artwork, these companies charge a lot of money up front for you to get that print. They have to, because they got to make a profit too, right? So if you're going to be paying all that money for their retail price up front and then turning around and trying to make a profit by selling it again, then you're going to have to charge an arm and a leg to make any sort of profit. And most people are just going to scoff at that, because nobody can spend that kind of money in this economy, whether they want to support you or not. So, pricing your work appropriately is really crucial. I don't want you to underprice yourself. Far from it. Do not be the cheapest guy around. That's not what you want to do. But with that being said, you don't want it to be outrageously priced either, because you'll find that not many people are going to buy your stuff if it's, the cost of a PS5 for a A3 Plus print. You know what I mean? Because they would rather just go buy a PS5. But if you can, meet in the middle and make it a reasonably priced investment, and they know they're getting a high quality piece from somebody that they know and care about, or maybe they don't know, but they really admire the work of, and it's a high quality frame and it's signed and they just really like the work, then they'll generally go for it. And then after you work through that initial batch of family and friends that, are undoubtedly going to support you, hopefully, as long as you're a decent person, then, you can go around town and talk to various business owners. Lots of coffee shops, for example, sell local artwork. And, some of the coffee shops in my area have artwork that leaves something to be desired. I will just say that. I definitely would not want to insult any artists, but just in my opinion, it needs more variety. I'll say that. It just needs more variety. So, go talk to places like that, bring a couple prints with you and say, hey, what do you think? Do you think I could hang a couple of my prints here and see if anyone's interested? And, even if it doesn't necessarily sell, people are seeing your work every day, and that can make a difference. And if you put your card in the corner of the photo and you've got your Instagram on there, then you might get more followers, and overall it can just grow your base. And, that's what you want ultimately, is to get more eyes on your work, right? So get more eyes on your work, make a little bit of extra money while you're doing it, and have fun. I mean, because that's why we like doing this. We all like to have fun and do astronomy and astrophotography. And man, if we can make a little extra money while we're doing it, even better, right? I mean, who's going to complain about that? So that is printing in a nutshell for astrophotography beginners. Again, I highly recommend, from personal experience, the Canon Pixma Pro 200. I will link that in the show notes for anyone and everyone to check out. It's an awesome printer. Very high quality. It is pretty big. Make sure you have some desk space cleared out for it. You can check the specs to make sure that, you have a wide enough area. It's an awesome looking printer too. It'll definitely be something that you'll be like, yeah, that's awesome every time you see it sitting on your desk. I have it out here in the garage where all my Astro gear is, and I keep it covered up with my little Simpsons blanket, just so it doesn't get dusty and dirty. And I absolutely love it. So very good investment. And I hope that some of you guys out there will make that investment in yourselves too, and will, continue pursuing your dreams in astrophotography and, just make some awesome prints. Even if you only make them for yourselves, if you make a giant astrophotography wall in your house, maybe, with all of your various prints that you've taken over the years, that would be well worth the investment too. So thank you again to Roger from Texas for asking about this topic. This is something I have wanted to cover for many weeks now, and I'm glad we were able to cover it today. He actually asked about two other things that I am going to be talking about in very near episodes. That is going to be filters and my workflow in PixInsight. So I realize that there are a million videos on YouTube talking about PixInsight from top to bottom, but I thought it would be useful for you guys to hear exactly what I do in PixInsight. And then obviously I can leave some examples in the show notes to show you, what I end up with. And I'm pretty happy with my results at the end of the day. So look forward to those episodes in the very near future. I'd like to make another quick announcement, and that would be a shout out to our first Patreon member. That is Carrie. I actually wrote Carrie a brief message. I didn't want to use your full name because I didn't hear back from you yet, and I don't want to use people's full names without their permission. But I wanted to give a shout out to Carrie. Thank you so much for joining the Patreon. Very humbled by your support. And if anybody else would like to join, that is patreon.com/the Astrocast. And we actually have some really big things planned for that. And one thing that I would like to announce today, since it is our 10th episode, is that we are actually planning on having our first Patreon members only meetup for the Astrocast. So at some point in the near future, we are going to have a private Discord meetup where myself and all of the members are going to get together and talk astronomy and astrophotography for some time. At least an hour, maybe longer. We'll just kind of see how it goes. And I'm planning on doing that on a weekend night, likely a Saturday night. Hopefully that's the best time where we can all get together and spend some time talking shop and talking about astronomy and astrophotography, because I think that would be a lot of fun to do. So I'm planning that a little bit ahead in the future, probably at least 2 or 3 months from now, because I want to give people ample time to join the Patreon if they would like to participate in that. So if that is something that you're interested in, please feel free to support the page. It's patreon.com/the Astrocast. I will leave a link for that in the show notes. Other benefits include a shout out at the end of each episode. So again, I am giving you your shout out, Carrie. So thanks again so much for joining. Just so you know, any donations that are made are just going to go to spreading word of the show. So thus far, we have spent $0 in advertising on the Astrocast, and I would like to change that. So I would like to be able to promote our show on some similarly topicked shows that are out there. There's not really any shows that are just like ours, but there are some that are in the vein of the Astrocast. So if I could get us some advertisements on those shows, I think that would bring in more listeners and help grow our family. So for $5 a month, that's what we will do. And in the future, we might look at adding different tiers and such. But for now, that's what we're doing. So again, thank you so much for your support. It means so much to me, and I just greatly appreciate that. So that's kind of the big announcement for this week's 10th anniversary episode. I'm saying 10th anniversary like it's been 10 years. Obviously, it is not. But yeah, the Patreon meetup, I think it's going to be super cool. I hope we have several members by the time we do it in a couple months. I'd like to have at least a dozen of us. Hopefully we can all get together, and we'll see how that goes. So we'll all be getting together to talk about astronomy and astrophotography. If you aren't a member of your local astronomy club yet, perhaps this will give you kind of a taste of what that is like to be around like-minded people and be able to, talk about astronomy all night long. And I might even do a live stream. I'm considering that, maybe if we get a clear night, setting up the scopes and kind of walking you guys through what my process is like, and then obviously answering any questions you have for me about the podcast and those sorts of things. And speaking of questions, if you have any questions or would like to send in any corrections in the future, please feel free to do that. You can email me at rooastrocast@gmail.com. That's ROO astrocast@gmail.com. That's also in the show notes down at the bottom. And I know I do occasionally screw up when I'm talking about apertures and, focal lengths. I heard myself talk about the ASCAR 185, and I think I referred to 1.85 as the focal length instead of the aperture a couple weeks ago. And I heard myself say that and I thought, dang it, I can't believe I messed that up. So if you ever catch anything like that and you want to send it in a correction, by all means, shoot it over to me and I will make sure to add that into the corrections on the following week's episode. And if you have any questions or comments or feedback, please feel free to email that to me. I'm always looking to incorporate new ideas, or if you have an idea for a show topic, like I say, Roger sent in some excellent ideas this week, and I want to send another big thank you to him for sending those in. And that is excellent topics that we will be covering. So if there's something that you would like to hear about, just shoot it over to me. Again, that's ruastrocast@gmail.com. One other brief cool thing I'd like to mention is tomorrow night, I actually get to see Neil deGrasse Tyson live. He will be in Charlotte, North Carolina at the Belk Theater. Live on March 11th. Obviously, the show comes out on March 12th, but I am recording on Sunday this week just because I do have that show to attend on March 11th. So I will obviously tell you about what he said and how the show went next week. I'm a big fan of his. I've read many of his books and actually have a signed copy of his latest book, which is very, very cool. If you ever get a chance to see him live, definitely do that. This will be my first chance seeing him live, but he does tour quite a bit from what I understand. So I'm definitely a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson's. He's a very intelligent man, obviously, but I particularly like the way that he is able to explain incredibly complicated things in just simple, easy to understand layman's terms. Astrophysics for people in a hurry. That would be my recommendation this week. It's an excellent book that he wrote that explains astrophysics for people who don't have time to go to school for 8 years to learn about it. So if you want to get a basic understanding of how astrophysics works, it's an excellent read. There's a great version on Audible that he actually narrates. And it's a quick read too. It's not that long. I think the Audible is only about 8 hours long, if I remember correctly. So highly recommend that you give that one a listen or a read, depending on what your preferred format is. So that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Astrocast. I'm your host, Rue. Thank you so much for joining us for the first 10 episodes of the Astrocast. Just thanks so much to everyone for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. If you like us, please make sure you leave a review and spread the word. Share it with a friend or a family member or your local astronomy club if you're a member. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I'll be back next week with another topic. And until then, clear skies. Recommendation. I got you, fam. What you're going to want to do is, after you listen to this podcast, you're going to go search for Cabinet of Curiosities. And it's going to be Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities. These are brief, 10-minute long, interesting stories about curious subjects. And I'll just leave it at that. You're going to enjoy it. Trust me. Peace.